Welcome everyone to today's webinar entitled Providing Practical Retirement Income Planning Solutions During the COVID-19 Uncertainties. My name is Russell Todd, and I am host to this presentation from the Institute of Advanced Financial Planners. The IAFP is a community of registered financial planners who daily raise the practice standards of financial planners for the benefits of Canadians. We advocate for a community of professionals that value client first, integrated and comprehensive financial planning. Our guests can learn more about us at our website, www.iafp.ca. Today is a special webinar presentation between the IAFP, Paul Brzezinski, founder and CEO of Snap Projections, and our speaker, Yvonne Martin-Morrison from Raymond James. This webinar will last 60 minutes, including the question period. The topic is going to address the challenges facing professional financial planners today and how to guide clients toward a secure retirement in an uncertain time and when future income outcomes are uncertain. The question is, how does a professional financial planner provide guidance and direction when the answers are unknown and all the assumptions are changing? I will now introduce our attendees. First, Powell from Snap Projections will be our moderator for this special event. Powell?
Thank you very much, Russell. So let's start with a quick tech check to make sure everyone can hear us and see the slides. I know there's maybe a little glitch right now with the webinar, just a limiting number of people who can join, but hopefully we can resolve it in the next few minutes. Quick tech check. So if you could hear us, if you could see the slides, if you could please type yes in that question box, that would be greatly appreciated. We'll also be using the same questions box for asking any questions you may have. So if you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into that box. We may try to answer some of them as we go along, but if not, I will be able to save them for the last 10 minutes of the Q&A period. So yeah, so I can see some yeses coming in, but we have lots of people right now. So yeah, don't be shy. Great turnout today. So just join in and let me know if you can hear us, if you can hear us and see the slides. Perfect. Thank you. Lots of people here. Gor, Trina, Sandy, Mike, Teresa, lots of people. That's awesome. So lastly, before I hand it off to Russell to introduce the speaker, please consider putting your cell phone on silent and turning off your email and grabbing your notebook, because this content is going to be really useful and you wouldn't want to be distracted. I personally had a chance to connect with Yvonne about a year ago, and I have been very impressed with her work, with her financial planning style. Then we actually had the pleasure to have Yvonne on one of our podcasts, which, by the way, was one of the most popular episodes. And I can't really imagine to have a better speaker on this very timely topic. So Russell, back to you.
Our presenter today is Yvonne Martin-Morrison, Certified Financial Planner in Canada and Chartered Retirement Planning Counselor in the US, and Financial Planner in the Retirement and Financial Planning Private Client Solutions with Raymond James in Calgary. Yvonne was the winner of the Plan Plus Global Financial Planning Award for Canada in 2019. She provides timely advice, planning services, and tax intelligence while still finding time to author educational planning materials and presentations in publication for the benefit of Raymond James advisors and their clients. Yvonne is guided by the premise that planning, no matter how good, is useless unless it is effectively implemented. She has been in the financial services industry since 1993, building her capacity in integrated financial planning and retirement planning. I'm sure you will find her talk today to be insightful. Yvonne, it's yours.
Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here. I just have to correct one thing. While I was very honored with an award in the Plan Plus competition last year, I was not the winner. I came in second, but still, it was a great experience for me. So for information today, I'll let you know that prior to joining Raymond James, I was an advisor and planner and partner in a boutique wealth management firm. But fast forward to today, my job is supporting advisors and their clients, and at their request, I prepare financial plans for clients. I also provide financial intelligence for advisors and supervise advisors in their financial planning activities, which means that while I don't have unlimited time for planning, I do have more time to devote to pure planning than maybe other advisors who are also running a full service practice and offer broader financial services. So today is about financial intelligence for you planners and advisors attending, and my plan is for you to return from the webinar with greater clarity about what it looks like to tackle the challenges and the opportunities in the retirement income planning process during periods of uncertainty like we find ourselves in with COVID-19. And you're likely here today to learn something new to help your clients, and I'll add that this will help you stand out among a sea of advisors with your uncommon and very relevant service. We need to be realistic and knowledgeable about uncertainty and responding effectively, because life is what happens to us while we're making other plans, and uncertainty is nothing new. But what might be new is how much information is coming at us about how uncertain it really is and how vulnerable we really are. So speaking of vulnerability, most of us are probably aware of the vulnerability of retirement plans in the retirement risk zone. A study of retirees and people approaching retirement revealed that more are afraid of running out of money than death itself. Retirement risks come to bear whether the retirement years will deplete their wealth or whether they want to maintain wealth for a legacy after they're gone. So you're probably able to recall that the retirement risk zone is the critical zone where retirement savings capital and contributions are most impacted for the longest term. So we need to help our clients by, and especially those who are in the retirement risk zone, by taking financial planning to another level. And that's a more evidence-based level where we're validating best practices. And how do we do that? Well, we go beyond CE and we critically examine our assumptions. We stay abreast of new research and critically evaluate it, and we answer our profession's most important questions with evidence-based, proven research. And we can even go further and partner with academia to further research initiatives. So think of planning from a traditional position or an advanced strategic position. Traditional is applying a set of powerful analytic tools to predict the future accurately enough to choose a clear strategic direction for it. And this is tempting for someone like me who wants to understand problems fully, figure out all the solutions. This does tend to be linear, and it assumes that all material factors are predictable and well understood. And when the future is extremely uncertain, this approach is at best marginally helpful and at worst downright dangerous. This is because extreme uncertainty defies predicting a limited number of outcomes. And underestimating uncertainty can lead to strategies that neither defend against the threats nor take advantage of the opportunities that come. And there's another danger. If one can't find a strategy that works under traditional analysis, one can abandon the analytical process altogether and base decisions on gut instinct. Advanced strategic planning under uncertainty still identifies clear information that allows us to measure and analyze the current situation and identify potential outcomes, but there are current unknowns that are knowable with the right analyses. It's the residual uncertainty that cannot be known and that only time will tell us the outcome. Advanced strategic planning accepts that material factors may not be predictable and may not be knowable. Now, when the future looks clear, this minor residual uncertainty is not a big deal to either planning style. But as future murkiness increases, analyzing probabilities in a traditional manner decreases in usefulness. Now, 2020 has been an exercise in proving that uncertainty can increase and increase to an extreme level. So from when we were first learning about there being a virus in China to our own social distancing and community shutdowns, our uncertainty levels fluctuated. And as we can see, I've represented it here. So the amount of residual uncertainty that only time will tell became very extreme, and it was very eclipsing. Now, here's the thing about responding to extreme uncertainty. We need to remember that it's temporary. And with time, stabilization does occur and more does become certain. So there's different strategic responses that are appropriate to different levels of uncertainty. One key is to start identifying a range of futures. When the level of uncertainty rises to extreme levels, recognizing that it defies predicting a limited number of outcomes. And another key is a need for flexibility to implement strategies and then incorporate new information and actual outcomes and adapt those strategies. So planning can continue in uncertainty, and it should continue in uncertainty, but it continues differently, using strategies that incorporate new information as it becomes available. This clarity gives us a consistent position, and we can communicate that to our clients. Speaking of clients, this is an evidence-based practice. Studies show that a systematic discovery process that includes clients' goals, values, expectations, not only supports our consistent and thorough analysis, but clients highly value it. It influences their perception, it influences their trust of their planner, their cooperation with and commitment to the plan and the planning process. So when times are uncertain, it's even more important for planners to ask questions, not interrupt, listen, take notes. Our goal is to uncover concerns and gain perspective on the client's financial situation. It might be basic, but we need to understand their journey and be empathetic. We also need to take time to digest what they're sharing with us and to reflect back to them so that they know that we understand. When we're collecting the relevant quantitative information, we need to continue to be curious. And we have to ask ourselves, what is the initial data showing us? What's lining up and what's not lining up? I had a situation where I was working on a plan with an advisor who was very concerned because his clients were spending and withdrawing from their savings at a very high rate, and they were going to run out of money. And so in the initial discovery process, I could see that something else had to explain their choices. My first thought was maybe they have other wealth, maybe they've got other investments or other business interests that would explain this pattern of behavior. So we had further conversation, and it came to be known what had previously been undisclosed, which these clients were expecting a very large inheritance from an elderly, wealthy parent, and they were expecting it soon. So they weren't worried about overspending. So rather than voice my concerns about the risks of counting on an inheritance, instead, I took the approach that if this was guiding the client's financial decisions, it was a material part of their financial plan, and it needed to be included and assessed. So this led to really dynamic conversation with the clients about parents' potential longevity, parents' use of their wealth, and what had been communicated about the estate plans. Ultimately, we ended up taking a conservative approach and incorporating that potential inheritance into their plan. So it's worth mentioning, and it's worth repeating, that we need to watch out for thinking that we know more about a situation than we actually do. And this kind of curiosity has been invaluable to me over the years, more times than I can count. It helps me understand the client complexities, it helps me uncover potential problems, and it helps me develop more realistic strategies and solutions for the clients. So in discovery, clients invariably ask for solutions while they're sharing and explaining their situation. And of course, we all know that solutions can't be presented until the analysis is complete, but I found that I can respond more to their desire for a solution and give them some helpful feedback at the beginning, rather than trying to describe a whole range of solutions that may or may not ultimately be applicable. So clients may say something like, I've heard that you should draw down your RSPs as quickly as possible. Or I've also heard that you should take just your RIF minimums, but I don't want to pay a whole bunch of estate tax. So which is it? Which should I do? And so I'll respond with something that will complement their desire to know more. Like, you're wise to be asking about your RSPs and the tax implications, because the decisions you make about drawing on that will impact your taxes by thousands of dollars. And people want to save tax. And so they try to come up with a rule of thumb that will help them decide. Now, I'll also explain that the trouble with rules of thumb is that it doesn't take into account a unique situation, and that it's a one-size-fits-all solution. So what I'm going to do is analyze their situation, analyze their need for their RSPs, and come up with some options and some analysis that will be customized to their unique situation. And the clients are often reassured by that kind of an approach. Also, I encourage advisors, when you are making notes, to not only write down what your clients are sharing with you, but write down what you are sharing with your clients. And keep in mind that we're in the relationship business. We have this opportunity to meet with people in person or by video, and it's so much more effective communication to share facial expressions and just the unspoken side that is apparent, rather than email or phone conversations about the important planning process. So when we've collected the information, we have to go through the basics and get it organized for analysis. And with the level of complexity in our work, we use tools like software, which I'm sure you all do. We'll prepare the net worth statements, the cash flow statements. We'll use assumptions according to financial guidelines. And while that might sound basic to remind you about this, we want to analyze their financial resources and compare it to their financial objectives. And we want to understand how it's all working together. And it can be tempting when we're busy to maybe rush through some of this beginning process. But before we get ahead of ourselves, we need to ensure we're properly prepared for a more thorough analysis. And anything less does put us at risk of making errors or maybe missing material information. So here are two separate plan engagements, real ones, that reflect clients with similar amounts of capital. So preliminary analysis shows that Anne has a surplus for retirement. Barbara has a shortfall over the planning timeline. And as we start thinking about how Anne and Barbara's desired retirement income lines up with their resources, we realize more analysis is going to help us determine what the client needs to understand, what is within their control and what's not within their control, to help them make their decisions for the future. And with high levels of uncertainty, my analysis involves isolating and stress testing key variables and factors that are both controllable and non-controllable. So in all cases, analysis has to start where we are today, not where we wish we were. And so in these cases, account values were used, and it was from March, where portfolio values were down and there'd been a little bit of recovery, but we used the account values for the time of the analysis. And when we're using our assumptions, we're careful not to predict the future, and we're careful not to give the message that we're predicting the future, especially a rosy one. We're conservative, and we use long-term current return assumptions, and we document our justification. Now, there's financial planning guidelines that provide not only well-researched assumptions, but they provide us with sound rationale. So that saves us tons of homework. So in our first client engagement, factoring in our justifiable assumptions, this scenario is projected to have insufficient resources, and it's producing a shortfall for Barbara. Now, she wants a comfortable retirement lifestyle where she's living at home as long as possible. Then she intends to sell her home and move to her retirement residence, or a retirement residence, and she wants to reduce tax at death. So do we go back to our client and say, sorry, we don't have enough? Well, of course, I vote for further analysis. So when we're looking at a shortfall, some advisors might go to software and change the rates of return. And that way they get a better projection, and they focus on changing the risk tolerance level with the client. Now, if that happens, you miss a real opportunity to empower the client. So instead, if we stick with the planning guidelines and we look for other opportunities to make changes, we can see better outcomes. So we do a year-by-year analysis, and we're looking at sources of income. We're looking at the withdrawal rates and the timing, and we're looking at taxation and any trends. And so you can see here in this pink section, this is when the capital is depleted. And we can also see that the tax was increasing with these taxable withdrawals, but it's reducing when the capital is depleted. But it's not eliminated because there's pension income present, and that continues even after the capital is depleted. So every software that I've ever used has generated some kind of alternative options. And I'm sure you've seen the output that suggests adding more capital, delaying retirement to a later date. So when we use those, we're not necessarily expecting it to produce a viable solution that's going to work for the client, but it does help us get an understanding, and we can assess it more critically about what factors are more influential. We can use it to leverage our analysis and save time, and we can zero in on those factors that will have the most impact. Now, unlike human financial planners, software does not do qualitative analysis, and it has obviously limitations in calculating certain options and alternatives. So we don't want to miss out on further analysis. Now, qualitatively, we assess that here, there's just too many variables that are outside Barbara's control. And the software-generated scenario won't juggle the different priorities of living independently or evaluating the advantages and disadvantages of borrowing to fund your lifestyle at age 85. But we can do that, and we do. So our revisions of our analysis will start with a reduced retirement lifestyle and the timing of the sale of the home. So when we compare our sustainable revisions, here we go, to the original current plan, we see here there is no shortfall, like there was there. And we do that by attending first to the knowable uncertainties and strategizing around that. So after confirming with the client, we can see that the retirement needs could be reduced from 80,000 to 60,000 annually in today's dollars indexed. And that means less funds are withdrawn. What we see is we're starting to flatten the curve. Now, with the withdrawal rate reduced, then taxable withdrawals are reduced year over year, and that preserves capital longer. And as a consequence, income tax is illustrated lower on an annual basis, as well as lower over the whole planning timeline, and less tax further reduces the withdrawal rate. Now, the income threshold here is projected to not trigger OAS pension recovery tax or clawback, and that further reduces the withdrawals because other income sources have increased. So the curve gets even flatter. I bet you didn't think about flattening the curve when it came to financial planning. So this is a cascade of effects of small adjustments that is combining for a really big upshot. So this is very reassuring. We've gone from here to here, but we don't stop there because we're concerned about volatile returns. That's the residual uncertainty. So an adverse sequence of returns can be analyzed, and we see here, I won't show you the whole calculation, but we can see here that there is still sufficient capital, but just. So projections that just squeak by, they demand more review, more monitoring. And so in this scenario, the factors I've just described can be monitored regularly, and they can be monitored more often in more uncertain times like now. So if uncertainty defies predicting limited outcomes, what about looking at hundreds at once? How about 500? Here we go. As long as we keep in mind that these do not represent all possible outcomes, but they're certainly helpful in projecting a range of possible futures. So here we have a base case in yellow, and we have better cases in green, and we have worse cases in red. We want the client and her investment advisor to see what our analysis has revealed to us. The client's retirement income strategy is not only about investment returns. If I could just get a better rate of return is not the approach to take to her projected shortfall. If we planners are convinced, how do we explain it to the clients and the other advisors involved? Well, when we illustrate better case scenarios with the Monte Carlo analysis here, it can be seen that the better case still does not meet the need. Boom. Higher returns in a better sequence is not the only factor that we can't rely on. It also doesn't solve the problem of potential shortfall. So here we see there is a 1% probability of success, even with the better returns. So let's park Barbara's situation for a minute and talk about the financial impact of sequence of returns. We have two portfolios. Both are worth $1 million. Both withdraw $50,000 annually, and both earn an average rate of return of 5.1%. Market returns are identical but mirrored. So let's examine the mathematical impact of returns while making these systematic withdrawals. Here we are in year 10. Now, with more favorable sequence of returns at the beginning rather than at the end, we see the portfolio value is nearly double that of the portfolio with the same adverse returns, but they were at the beginning rather than at the end. And this is only part of the retirement income challenge. Investors can reassure themselves that a recovery in the market will restore their portfolio to its former values. But what magnitude of recovery is required? Whoops, there we go. So the mathematical reality is that withdrawals magnify the losses and magnify the necessary recovery gains. So with no withdrawals and 3 years to recover, the gain required to recover from a 10% loss is 11%. A 20% loss, 25%. A 30% loss, 43%. And if there's a 50% loss within 3 years, if there's a 100% gain, there will be recovery. But when there are annual withdrawals at a rate of 6%, the gain required to recover from a 10% loss is 33%. A 20% loss, 51% required. 30% loss, 74% required. And if there's a 50% loss while annual withdrawals are 6%, in 3 years, the required gain is 150%. So relying on market recovery may not work out in the long term. And it could work out in the long term. Basically, only time will tell. So with that kind of residual uncertainty, what is a planner supposed to look for in solutions today? So we come back to Barbara's situation, and I remind you that our revisions were about incorporating the original return and the same inflation, but we projected the changes of lifestyle to $60,000 annually, and we preserved the capital longer. And at age 85, instead of age 90, we projected her selling her home and moving into a retirement residence and investing her home equity. So from 85 to 100, her retirement lifestyle, including the residence, became $90,000 annually in today's dollars, and we indexed that to inflation. So you'll remember that the combination of those sequencing of withdrawals, controlling the source of income, controlling the tax, and preventing OAS clawback resulted in a positive meeting of her retirement goal, and she actually had a little bit of surplus. Now, this is supported as a best practice in a study by Dr. William Reichenstein. This is where he showed that properly ordering withdrawals and taxation extended the life of an average retirement portfolio by an average of 7.5 years. So what does that look like when we're looking at a range of potential returns, especially with this kind of uncertainty that we're still experiencing? We really can't forecast a limited number of outcomes. So we see here with the Monte Carlo analysis of 500 scenarios, the probability of success has increased to 91% with these changes. And it begs the question, what probability is safe enough? Obviously, the 1% from the prior situation was not acceptable. And so with 91% here, we see that we've got a lot more room to work with. So anything less than 80% is probably too risky. It doesn't give enough flexibility to adjust to changes or the unexpected. 100% is great, but it may actually be a little too conservative because the clients might short themselves out of fear of running out of money, and they could actually afford a higher lifestyle for themselves. Now, I'll hazard to suggest that if we're going to be more comfortable with higher probabilities of success, we don't want to get too comfortable unless we have a diversified portfolio of income, growth, and preservation strategies. It would have to include investments and financial products with guarantees, as well as flexibility and contingency. And it would be set up in such a way it could be monitored and evaluated and adjusted over time. So when we're looking at structuring the portfolio for income, instead of depending exclusively on expected returns, we can include some guaranteed floor of income options with no risk of default and no downturn risk. And when we're looking at risk tolerance, even if the risk tolerance is high, examine risk capacity. At what point is the capacity to replace losses with realistic gains no longer present? What is too much capital to risk? Well, think in terms of years of income needs. If we're planning 30 years of retirement with full decumulation of capital, and we're looking at keeping 10 years of income needs safe, well, that could represent up to 1/3 of the retirement capital. But if we're planning for the last 5 to 10 years of retirement, and we're keeping the last 10 years of income needs safe, well, we could be looking at 100% of the retirement capital. So if we're accepting that we don't know the future, we can see that diversification actually offers us a free lunch. Not just investment diversification, but tax diversification, asset, income, risk, contingency diversification. It provides us with flexibility and the ability to adapt and pivot. So 1 or 2 tools in the toolbox is definitely not sufficient. If we did know the future, we could design the perfect plan, but we don't. So we prioritize flexibility and contingency. The thing about rigid rules is that they're usually too inflexible and they actually don't work because they are one size fits all. And one size fits only in very particular circumstances. Today's market environment proves that what studies have shown us before, a downturn cripples a portfolio that is subject to inflexible rules. Conversely, upmarket opportunities get missed the same way with inflexible rules. So conventional and traditional asset allocation advocates for a retirement portfolio with less equities and increased fixed income over time. Now, a more flexible approach that bears analysis is to reserve a fraction of that portfolio for the last half to third of the retirement period and invest that capital in longer-term investments such as equities. The income needs in the first third of the retirement period are set aside in shorter-term, more conservative investments that are unaffected by potential defaults or downturns. So remember that retirement risk zone? This strategy provides more certainty for the early years, but the later years can afford more risk to be rewarded by higher growth opportunities. And the risk can be mitigated further with dollar cost averaging that can be implemented successfully when markets are down and rebalanced, and profits can be harvested and the portfolio can be rebalanced when markets are up. Now, there's a lot more detail to this that I would love to go into, but it's beyond the scope of this presentation today. So when we're coming back to current uncertainties, we've seen strategic planning that laid out a roadmap for Barbara. So thanks to detailed analysis, the ongoing monitoring and adjusting process can incorporate new information and can identify key factors and triggers to monitor and respond to. So I would like to take a moment and test your knowledge. So I've got a question for you. It's not a trick question, but I suggest you think very carefully about it before you answer it.
All right, Yvonne, we are ready to launch the poll. Do you want to ask the question?
I would love to. So here's your question, everyone. What is the annualized real rate of return of the TSX excluding dividends from January 1st, 1970 to January 1st, 2020? So think carefully. Go ahead.
Just to make it easier for you, there's a couple of answers. So it's multiple choice. So we've just launched the poll. So if you're looking at the screen, you should be able to see the question, and you can select one of the four answers. So 10.38%, 6.26%, 4.94, and 1.89. So again, the question: what is the annualized rate of return of TSX excluding dividends, not without the dividends reinvested, from 1970 to 2020, 50 years, January 1st to January 1st? All right, I think we can see lots of responses right now. Let's give it maybe another 30 seconds. Oh, wow, this is interesting. Okay, maybe another 10 seconds. So we haven't had a chance to vote. Looks like most of you actually had a chance to vote right now. So this is great. Look at this engagement. All right. All right. 10 more seconds. Lots of answers are coming in. All right. So now we're going to close the poll right now, and I'm going to show the results. And Yvonne, do you want to go over the results and tell us what's the correct answer?
I would love to, except for I can't see the results.
You can't see the results. All right. So I'm going to actually show, go over the results. So first question, 1038, that's about 13% of people. And next, 6.26, that was about 29% of all responses. 494, that's about 31, so pretty much the same as previous one, 31%. And 189, that's about 27% all responses. So what's the correct answer, Yvonne?
Well, all of those answers are typically what I receive when I put this question to folks. And the real answer, the correct answer is the real rate of return is 1.89%. And that's represented by an average rate of return of 5.8% minus a 3.91% inflation rate. So without dividends, when we look at 1970, the index was 1,019.77. In 2020, the index was 17,063.43 with a cumulative return of over 1,500%, but averaged and annualized 5.8 minus the 3.91 inflation rate. And you might remember, real rate of return is the rate minus inflation. Now, dividend data from S&P Global indicates that the average annualized dividends over the last 10 years is 2.1% over and above the price index return. And that may have been on the mind of a few people answering today. But what I want you to take into account is that projected rates of return, many times people want to use a historical rate and they isolate a number without taking it in context. And so real rate of return is helpful in the sense of an average rate of return minus the inflation in context of that same time period. So when we look at planning guidelines, Canadian equity is projected to return long-term 6.1%. Inflation is projected at 2% for a real rate of return of 4.1% before fees. So thank you very much for thinking about that and sharing your answers. I will leave that with you to digest a little bit. So reviewing previously prepared financial plans in the midst of extreme uncertainty. So again, a real situation, they're everywhere. The client's intention was to retire from his six-figure executive position on his 65th birthday this year. So March 16th was the scheduled review meeting. The original plan, while it was sustainable, did not have much surplus in it, and now the portfolio is down considerably. So do we tell the client to carry on with their plans, hope for the best? Do we chuck everything and go on gut instinct? Or do we look at something different? Now, one temptation is for a planner to go into a big presentation about historical market crashes, economic indicators, and so much more, but I would like to suggest another approach. Going for a more stable, more favorable outcome from an advanced strategic position is what allows us to give the client the most options until more information becomes available as things stabilize. So while we don't predict the future, we can outline a range of future scenarios to prepare for. So we would be preparing for minimally impactful effects of what's going on that's so uncertain, moderately impactful effects in uncertainty, and severe and extreme impact effects due to the uncertain situation. The intention is to equip and empower the client to make their own informed decisions. So rather than frighten them or risk paralyzing them or even give them a false sense of security, we want them to slow down and think about options that give them more choices. So going ahead and quitting a long-time job and living on retirement savings in the midst of uncertainty is only okay if the uncertainty develops to be minimally impactful. But it's potentially damaging if it turns out that there are moderate or severe effects materializing. Not so good. So today, with the client still in his job, postponing retirement, while it might be potentially disappointing, it positively influences his financial security, and it's a more favorable choice for all three of those scenarios I described. And it can adapt to new information. In extreme uncertainty, when faced with retirement decisions, making the choices with the most benefits in all three potential kinds of outcomes is ideal. Choices with consequences that are only favorable in one or two scenarios is least attractive. Now, there's other decisions and options that give favorable retirement outcomes for most of these scenarios, and that fits in with deferring what can wait. Hold off on those discretionary renovations. Don't cash in those investments that have just tanked. Keep more cash available. Also, making investments over time rather than big deposits into a volatile investment choice, again, gives more flexibility. And attending to the risks that remain no matter what the circumstances are is very important. People can sometimes focus on the headlines and they forget to attend to their goals and to prepare for contingencies. And they may forget to deal with questions like, what about my estate? What if I can't sell my business? What if I get disabled or incapacitated? What if my renters don't pay their rent? And what if I have to dip into savings to pay the mortgage on my rental property? You know, so we want to revisit the contingency plans. And if they don't have contingency plans, it's a good time to work on one. So when we're evaluating options and choices over time, trying to set up solutions and strategies where there's an if-then component to them, meaning this is how we'll adapt if this happens. This is how we'll make adjustments if that happens. And so we want to communicate to our clients that things are very uncertain and we want to focus on them, keeping them healthy, keeping them safe, giving them flexible choices and options, and looking to incorporate new information as things stabilize. So we need to remember when we're evaluating alternatives, we're linking these alternatives to the client's goals, to their personal story, and to what they have emotional buy-in. So we prioritize first the no sweat options. No sweat means there's a payoff no matter what in all three of those scenarios. It might be reducing costs, it might be low risk investing, but there's also a place for what is called considered actions. And those are designed to achieve objectives in a best case with minimal downside risk in a worst case. So, you know, diversification is a perfect example. But we need to watch out for aggressive moves. That can be Those can be tempting when there's a false sense of security. Those can also be tempting when someone gets fearful. So aggressive moves are large commitments with upside in some scenarios and large losses in others. Now, remember that we had 2 planning engagements? This is Anne's projection with a retirement capital surplus. Very nice. So where do we go with further analysis from here? Well, we can use the same principles that we discussed and we can apply them here. Because even with projected surplus in retirement resources, it is important to stress test for the general factors that are outlined in planning guidelines and also to include the specific unique factors for the clients. We would be asking things like, what is the maximum sustainable lifestyle? What are the worst case scenarios that still remain sustainable? And when we're looking at surplus, it can naturally lead into analysis and conversation about estate planning and surplus capital options. So when we're doing a general stress test, there might be unexpected expenses we want to analyze, potential investment downturns, loss of income, premature death, disability, all of those really pleasant things to think about, and often clients avoid thinking about. And in client-specific situation, they may need to understand what happens if the sale of their business falls through, or if their business partner gets a divorce and triggers the shotgun clause in their shareholder agreement, or maybe a demand loan gets called. So preparing for adverse changes means we're looking not only at the probability that something could potentially happen, but the impact if it were to happen. And we need to run scenarios to quantify what that impact would be and quantify potential alternatives and options. So for example, with disability, which is typically something that's not controllable, we can quantify and compare alternatives and the cost benefit of depending on your savings versus acquiring an insurance program to do that. And we want to prioritize those no sweat options that I was describing. And looking at something, another example might be a lost decade of investment returns. We can look at what does it look like to work longer, maybe spend less, consolidate debt. Again, prioritizing no sweat options and avoiding risky, aggressive moves. So with uncertainty, we focus on the more qualitative aspects, and this helps provide perspective. Qualitative is more about factors that add value and take away value, and then evaluating the effects of those factors. It's the subjective part of our work that's less tangible, but it's just as important as the quantitative. So factors that are just as relevant today during uncertainty and turbulence as they are during more stable times are the client's goals and objectives, their lifestyle, their attitudes, their expectations, constraints in their situation, family and business dynamics, legal implications, risk, estate, business succession, emergency preparedness, education, regulatory and tax issues, major purchases. There's so much more. The list really can go on. So we're looking at factors within the client's control, outside their control, and we're developing scenarios that help us account for a probable range of futures, as opposed to trying to identify specific futures. Again, think Monte Carlo analyses. Pardon me. We want to transform concerns to contingencies, and clients will wonder how concerned they need to be, but they might be afraid to ask. And some of their concerns might be, what if there is no quick recovery in the markets? What happens if I do lose my job and I have to live on my savings for 6 months? And what if selling my business is not a reliable option? Strategic planning will quantify the financial impact of these what ifs and allowing these concerns to be turned into contingency plans. So we can look at no sweat alternatives, we can look at considered actions, and we can help clients be better prepared for what might happen. So I have a question for you about contingency planning. If you get yourself ready for this one, there will be a poll. Or maybe there will be a poll. Well, I'm going to ask you the question anyway, whether there's a poll or not. We have guidelines that recommend a projection period for clients where the probability of outliving their capital is no more than what percentage? So if you think about it, oh, I still can't see the poll. So I'm just putting the question to you.
Hi, Yvonne, it's Tracy. Sorry, just a second. I have launched the poll. So if we want to just give a moment for everyone to have a chance to submit their responses.
Please do. I'm sorry, I couldn't see it on my screen, so I thought maybe it was missed.
Nope, that's okay.
So yes, the current guidelines recommend a projection period for clients where the probability of outliving their capital is no more than what percentage? 0, 25, 50, or 75?
Okay, so they are coming in. It looks like Powell had a problem and got kicked out, but he's back in now, so I'm going to let him take over the poll. Okay, so it looks like the poll has been closed. We had 15% that replied with 0, 67% that replied with 25%, 8% of the people said 50%, and 10% said 75%.
Terrific, terrific responses. Thank you, everyone. So the answer is 25%. And so we can see the number of people, obviously, who responded correctly. So it's recommended to assume a projection period for clients where the probability of outliving their capital is no more than 25%. Forecasting a longer projection period offers protection from future improvements in mortality and accounts for the greatest financial risk to an individual, longevity risk. So for example, we see an average female Canadian age 60 has an average life expectancy to age 91. And that means she has a 50% chance of passing away before that and a 50% chance of living longer than that. And she has a 25% probability of living to 96. Whereas an average Canadian couple age 60 has a 25% probability of one of them living to age 98. So it's also recommended that the greatest mortality age be used that corresponds to the client's circumstances, unless there is substantial information suggesting that an adjustment should be made. So thank you very much for that. So now it's time to present the plan. So before assembling the report, we need to know and we need to ask ourselves, what is it that we want the client to understand at their level? Not the planner level, we want the client to understand at their level. As well, when we're building the plan, we want to link their goals and their emotional buy-in to the analysis and the recommendations that we're sharing. And then when we have our presentation meeting, we want our client to set the tone. And so at the beginning, I'll ask, what's new? What's anything different since we last spoke? And obviously listening carefully for what the client might share in that situation. And I'll also mention that I'm prepared to review quite a few different things during the presentation meeting, but I want to know, client, what is top of mind for you? And I'll listen very carefully and adjust the presentation in response to what the client shares as far as what their questions are, what their concerns are. This is because studies show that allowing the client to share their questions and concerns before you present is more effective for the planning process. Otherwise, they found that in advisor-client relationships, if the questions are at the end, the client tends to hold back on voicing their questions or their concerns, typically out of respect and kindness. They don't want to make waves. So asking them for their questions first overcomes that tendency. And that brings me to the conclusion of my presentation. I would definitely welcome your questions.
Wonderful, thank you, Yvonne. Okay, so now is the time, if you didn't have a chance to ask your questions earlier, now is the time to actually use the questions box and type of question right there. So 2 questions right from the bat here, just from David and Kent. So they're curious actually regarding some of the software that you use for the Monte Carlo analysis, and yeah, so that's the question from a couple of people here.
And so the question was, is it what software, or is it how do I use the software?
Well, which software did you use for the Monte Carlo analysis? It's very specific. It's just basically they want to know what kind of software was that.
Yes, the Monte Carlo analysis you saw was done by Naviplan.
Thank you. Okay, another question here. So Yvonne, your process is quite involved. So, how do you stay focused on providing value to the client when you're faced with considerable time constraints? So how do you set priorities, really? Question from Rob.
That's a really good question, and it's one that I have to really focus on. I'm a big picture thinker, and I like to think about as many options as possible. So for me to stay focused, number one, it's to focus first on the client and what they have expressed. Not only are their goals and objectives, but some of those things that I was describing in the qualitative analysis, what are their attitudes? What is their knowledge level? What are their constraints? Because you want to respond to where they are now and what they need now, so that when you're developing strategies and solutions, it is for this moment that you're working with them. And the planning might take us through a process where it evolves over time, but it helps you focus in on right here and what you need to address, what you need to analyze, and how to focus in on that. I hope that helps.
Perfect, that's a great question, Robert. And another question here was about some of the data, some of the sources in the data about longevity. Steve is asking, so what was the source? Do you remember what is the source of that data?
Right, so the longevity information that I typically rely on comes from Statistics Canada, and we also have financial planning guidelines that consolidates different sources of information. You can also look at insurance longevity tables. They will give you more up-to-date and more current information, especially when you're looking at the probability. I am very keen to understand longevity because it is so impactful on retirement income planning. And the more you learn about certain facts, for example, the fact that an individual is a woman, is educated, and is financially stable puts her into the probability of longest living Canadians, the top 10% of longest living Canadians. And so when you're working with your clients, looking at those kinds of factors and understanding how that affects their longevity before they even walk through the door of your office is very important. And then, of course, learning more about how one of the things people will often say is, well, I've got certain health conditions, I don't expect to live a long time. The truth is, with advancements in medicine, people are not dying from health conditions. They might struggle with them, but their longevity is often not impacted from things that 20 years ago might have taken somebody out. So knowing about that and understanding that as you guide your clients through developing a planning timeline that's appropriate for them is very valuable. So yeah, go to Statistics Canada, go to financial planning guidelines, go to insurance longevity tables, and start there.
Wonderful, thank you very much, Yvonne. Great response, and thank you, Steve, for the question. And I think we can handle one more question before we need to wrap up here. So Question, Yvonne, about how do you transition to the plan implementation phase? So you're doing a lot of analysis, you have the plan in place, and the clients are impressed, or potentially maybe even speechless, but by the level of detail and quality you've been able to provide. But so how do you actually get the plan to the implementation phase?
The implementation is the hardest part for most plans, whether you're in business, whether you're an individual. And so very straightforward tools and very clear communication is important. Once you make sure that the client understands what has been reviewed and they're able to participate with their feedback, it is time to move into action mode and to not let it be put onto the shelf. So I use checklists, and we build out the priorities that the client recognizes are most important with the guidance of the advisors and the advisors involved, and coordinate everybody as far as what needs to be implemented and when. And we start doing the good old-fashioned SMART analysis. We get specific, we get very measurable, we set timelines and dates, and we move forward in that fashion, because you don't want to do the plan and then walk away, drop the mic. You want to move into action mode and implementation mode, knowing that the client understands.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Yvonne. Great response again. I've seen a couple more questions coming up, but I think it's time for us to wrap up. So I think if there are more questions, probably attendees can contact you directly, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some of their questions. But for now, I think we need to wrap up. So Russell, back to you so you can close everything for us here.
Thank you. Thanks again to our presenter, Yvonne Martin-Morrison, for her educational and challenging presentation, especially at this critical time with COVID-19 and the uncertainties it has created in personal finance. Our thanks to Powell from Snap Projections for introducing our talented speaker and assisting with the questions from our listeners. For those that had technical difficulties today getting into the program, we will be contacting you and providing a copy of this program. To our listeners today, please visit the IAFP site, www.iafp.ca, and consider joining our community for the growth of our profession. A recording of this program will be available for a limited time. You will receive an email shortly with links to the recording and additional information. Thank you, everyone, for attending this event, and this program is now ended.